What are some ridiculous history facts? There used to be bread stamps burned into a cooked loaf of bread to avoid bread fraud, as the government supplied the wheat/flour, but some bakers tried to use sawdust and other ingredients in the bread to make the wheat last longer. The bread stamps were baker specific, so they could track down where any tainted bread came from. If they were caught, they had to move to another town to make bread, or wait 3 years to continue making bread, if I remember correctly. Bread laws were huge throughout most of history. Nowadays, the idea of the government so strictly regulating an industry that they are forced to sell at a certain price seems odd, but in a time when food shortages were always a danger and food reserves were slim, bread becomes a very important commodity. It's how the Roman emperors kept Rome quiet despite the fact it was such an absurdly huge city, literally bread and circuses. Free bread, free water, and free entertainment. During the Viking era, there was a leader named Sigurd. He allied with a Viking warlord named Thorstein. He wanted to conquer more land and expand his territory. He had already been very successful in doing so. This was until he feuded with another leader called Marl Bucktoothed or Marl Tusk, as his front 2 teeth were abnormally large and buck-toothed. They decided to settle their matters on the battlefield and both agreed on bringing 40 men each for the battle. However, Sigurd ignored the terms and brought 80 men. Bucktoothed had realized he had been betrayed, but did not give up. They killed a number of Sigurd's men, but alas, they were overpowered and were all killed. Here's the catch. After the battle, Sigurd ordered his men to behead all the enemies and tie them to their saddles as trophies. However, as Sigurd rode home in victory, the severed head of Bucktoothed pierced his leg, which led to an infection, killing him soon after. Henry Cavendish, the man who was vital in the discovery of gases and discovered hydrogen. He inherited a ton of money from his uncle and built a special castle, I think. He was incredibly introverted, so it was designed so that he never had to meet or see any of his servants. He communicated with them through notes only. He did, however, appreciate other scientists coming to visit and talk. His works mostly came after his death, of course, but I found this guy interesting. Third place was also unusual. Albert Corey was a Frenchman living in the United States and a member of the Chicago Athletics Association. There was confusion as to which country he was representing as the games were combined with the US national championships for various sports, and the race officials were confused by his documents. In the marathon he was counted as running for the US, but was counted as French in the 4-mile relay. In 1967, Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt disappeared while swimming in the ocean. He was presumed drowned, so naturally that year we named a swim center after him in memoriam. Edit, added his name, which I meant to do when I wrote the post, but obviously my brain snapped midway through the sentence and I forgot it. General Omar Bradley was stopped by MP during the Battle of the Bulge in WW2 due to them thinking he was an artsy infiltrator. The irony was that he was stopped because he correctly identified the capital of Illinois as Springfield when the officer thought it was Chicago. I've met plenty of people who thought Chicago was the capital of Illinois just because it's our most populated city. Former US President Andrew Jackson was approached by a man who pulled a gun on him. Smaller history fact: this was the first assassination attempt on a US president. The man pulled the trigger and the cap went off, but the gunpowder failed to light. The man pulled a second gun and fired, but the gunpowder again failed to light. The assassin tried to get away, but not before Andrew Jackson got him and beat the shit out of him with a cane. Potatoes were not very popular as a food in France. Like they were seen as fit only for animals. Not only that, but they were considered generally not digestible by humans. So a pharmacist named Parmentier knew they were good food and wanted to popularize them among the working class. So he got a 2-acre farm to grow potatoes and placed armed guards around it at all times. People assumed armed guards meant something very valuable was growing there, so they began to steal the potatoes. That's how potatoes became popular in France's working class. The entire country of Malta was awarded the George Cross for its efforts in WWII. It's still on their flag. Interestingly enough, it sounds like the conditions for the awarding of the cross are kind of similar to how the Knights Hospitaller operated back in the Sword and Shield days. If you're unfamiliar, they were more or less a precursor to the Red Cross and the first real paramedics. When Alexander the Great was a child, he was reprimanded by a teacher for wastefully throwing 2 whole fistfuls of rare incense into a sacrificial fire. When he was an adult and captured Gaza, which happened to be the prime agricultural source of the incense he wasted, he sent home 18 tons of it home to the same teacher as a gift. Karl Marx's great-grandson has a YouTube video of him doing parkour, called ! Hannibal's defeat of the Romans at Lago Trasimeno. By leaving soldiers to light fires in the hills, he created the illusion that his army was 3 days' march away, when tens of thousands of men were actually concealed in the hills just above the lake. The Romans were surprised on the shore and trapped between the onslaught and the water. In their armor, half of the 30,000 Roman troops were either killed in battle or drowned in the lake. 5,000 were captured, and the other 10,000 staggered back to Rome, creating panic that the greatest army in the world had just been handed their ass by a Carthaginian upstart. It was the greatest ambush in military history. The Battle of Bull Run, during the American Civil War, was called the Picnic Battle because so many civilians from Washington went on picnics on the sidelines and watched. But once the battle actually started, and the Union started to get its ass kicked, they all ran away, running over injured soldiers and dead bodies, and generally disrupting the battle. This was actually a relatively common thing during the Civil War. I know it happened at Gettysburg too. It also happened at the Battle of Watling Street in the year 61. The Iceni were so confident they would defeat the Romans, they gathered round in their wagons to watch. When they were routed and had to fall back, the wagons blocked their path, and that's how Boudicca was defeated. I thought the wagon thing was pretty standard for Celtic migratory war parties. Families stand behind the lines, so that the warriors know retreat isn't an option. It might not be true. Suetonius tells us this story and he lived more than 50 years after Claudius Drusus died. It's also totally possible that he was actually murdered by a man named Sejanus, who was a pretty notorious figure in the early empire. We will probably never know what really happened to him. A lot of high-profile deaths surrounding the royal family, for lack of a better term, from around this time, that have wacky stories behind them, or at least there are suspicions, and there were suspicions at the time, that their deaths weren't entirely natural. Heirs to the throne under Augustus and Tiberius had a habit of dying young. Ancient Greek and Roman marble statues were actually originally painted and were colorful. A lot of the statues' paint faded away and went away over time. Some people cleaned off the paint thinking it was debris or dirt, and other people just plain cleaned and removed all of the paint off of them because they preferred the look of white marble. Rome was actually a very colorful city, and it wasn't all made of just boring plain white marble. I'm taking a course in classical archaeology and it's almost painful to sit through my professor discuss what the early archaeologists did. The Massachusetts colony band celebrating Christmas. During that time period, many people used it as an excuse to get hammered and party. Another tradition was that the young adults would cross-dress, then go door to door singing songs and demanding food. This clearly doesn't fit with Puritan lifestyle, so the governor banned public celebrations. People could still celebrate it in their homes if they didn't get too rowdy. I think it was unbanned when Massachusetts became a state, but didn't become mainstream until Christmas became a national holiday. Nashville briefly legalized prostitution during the Civil War. Union soldiers stationed there kept getting syphilis, so the no prostitutes were put on a large barge in the river. I'm a little fuzzy on what happened after that, but no, it didn't work very well. So it was legalized, and prostitutes had to be registered or get a license, I can't remember which, and we're required to have STD checks. This lowered the amount of prostitutes with syphilis because it was getting caught and treated. That lowered the amount of soldiers getting syphilis and made the army happy. It was outlawed shortly after the war ended though. From Wiki. Cato did not immediately die of the sword wound. but struggling, fell off the bed, and throwing down a little mathematical table that stood by, made such a noise that the servants, hearing it, cried out. And immediately his son and all his friends came into the chamber, where, seeing him lie weltering in his own blood, great part of his bowels out of his body, but himself still alive and able to look at them, they all stood in horror. The physician went to him, and would have put in his bowels, which were not pierced, and sewed up the wound, but Cato, recovering himself, and understanding the intention, thrust away the physician, plucked out his own bowels, and tearing open the wound, immediately expired. When the Netherlands was occupied by Renaissance in 1940, many people fled to Canada, including Princess Juliana of the Netherlands and her husband Prince Bernard of Lippe-Beesterfeld. Their daughter, Princess Margriet, was born in Ottawa. Not knowing if the baby would be male, and hence the heir to the throne, Canada declared the maternity ward of the Ottawa Hospital extraterritorial, which means it became international territory. This meant that the baby would derive its nationality only from its mother, making it 100% Dutch. Admiral Zinovy Reshestvensky of the Imperial Russian Navy was so notorious for throwing his binoculars into the sea during fits of rage, that his staff always ensured his flagship had an extra crate of binoculars on board. Some more fun stuff about him: he would make up insulting nicknames for ships and officers he disliked, such as the lecherous slut, the sink by themselves squadron, or the guard's uniform hanger, beat the tar out of crew members that disobeyed him, would fire live ammunition across the bows of errant ships, and was known to pull other ships alongside his, just to scream at its captain in front of the entire crew. Despite all this, he was considered one of the best officers in the Russian Navy, and was well liked by his crew, and took full blame for his defeat at the Battle of Tsushima, in order to save some officers from the death penalty. So while he may have been hot-headed, and had high standards for his crew, he was ultimately a fair and honorable man, just doing the best he could with what he had, and probably better than could be expected of anyone else in his position. And honestly, the Russian 2nd Pacific Squadron's voyage is a ridiculous topic in of itself. The amount of sheer incompetence is comical. Drachinifil has a fantastic video on it, would highly recommend. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit like. If you would like to see more, feel free to subscribe.